Welcome, dear readers. You are listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast. We are coming to you from the dark and mysterious Carol Shields Auditorium in the welcoming Millennium Library, which is located on Treaty 1 territory and on land that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. On today's slate, The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. I'm Alan Chorney, Transcontinental Librarian by day, podcast architect also by day, and to my left is...
Hi, I'm Erica Ball. I'm the branch head at Fort Garry Library. And across the table from me is...
Hi, I'm Trevor, and I am the president of the Louis Riel Pavilion at the World Libraries Exposition. And next to me is...
Hi, I'm Kirsten, and I am the librarian in the Harv City at the Harv Smith Library.
A good book can carry me away from an average and ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And you, dear readers, we couldn't do this without you. It's your questions and comments that form the heart of our discussions, so make us laugh or make us cry by emailing us at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca or leave a comment on our website, wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. Find out if your comments made it onto the air by subscribing to Time to Read on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. In a moment, Kirsten will start us off by giving us a brief bio of Erik Larson, followed by Erica, who will spoil everything with a brief synopsis. Then on to the discussions, which you can get in on by emailing us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca. Don't forget to stick around to the end for a special segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. And if you haven't read The Devil in the White City, this is your last chance to press pause. Don't worry, we'll wait. Kirsten, over to you.
Erik Larson is an American nonfiction writer and journalist. However, his first career aspiration was to be a political cartoonist. As a boy, he loved reading Nancy Drew and read all of the Nancy Drew books. And then he turned more to Alexandre Dumas and Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. He studied Russian history for his undergrad and attended the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, saying that he was inspired by the movie All the President's Men. He does all of his own research for his books and has stated that anything in his work that appears as a quote is something that has come from a historical document. He is also said to be influenced by crime novelist P.D. James and Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. On his website, you can find a logo with a pencil and 2 Oreo cookies, which Larson has said is his coat of arms.
That's cool.
He says if he has 2 Oreo cookies, then it's a bad writing day. So he always starts off with 1 Oreo cookie, I guess. And a particular type of pencil, too.
Yeah. So if he has a bad day, he gets 2 treats.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That helps.
Self-care.
Yeah, it's important. Okay, so the full title is The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. Set in Chicago in 1893, it's the novelistic retelling of the true tales of Daniel Burnham, the architect behind the 1893 World's Fair, and Dr. H.H. Holmes, pharmacist and serial killer. The story of Daniel Burnham, the building of the fair, and the struggles he overcomes to do so forms one plotline. The other is that of H.H. Holmes, a mentally unstable pharmacist/doctor who forms a plan to build a custom hotel, aka the elaborately constructed murder castle, to lure in and kill multiple victims. He was one of the first documented modern serial killers in the U.S. As such, it is a tale of 2 men and how flukes of both history and personality converged to position them to have an extraordinary impact. It is about ambition and pride and hubris, the power one person can have on others and on history, whether wielded for good or evil. And that was written by me and Wikipedia combined.
Nice.
Very good. There
The
it is.
Erica-pedia.
Yes.
But I guess we're assuming that serial killers existed prior to this guy.
We did. That's why I said
history.
documented.
Yes. Okay.
But they clearly had no idea, like it wasn't even on the police's radar that this could be a thing, right? Like nobody had really seen this level of premeditation, multiple murder.
The only thing that came close, I guess, a few years before that was Jack the Ripper in London.
Right.
But I think the mythology around Jack the Ripper has made him so much more than he maybe actually was. Like when you actually read the facts of Jack the Ripper, like sure, he did kill women, prostitutes, but his reign of terror was relatively short. Like it was I think it was just over maybe a few months or something.
Months, yeah.
And so that, I know that one had happened. And then there's always the mystery about like, who was Jack the Ripper? Did he die? Did he move to the States? There's a cajillion theories. And Patricia Cornwell wrote a book all about it where I think she claims she solved the mystery, but who's to say?
Ooh.
Maybe that'll be a future time to read
selection. Maybe, yeah.
We're gonna go full on serial killer podcast at this point.
It's gonna get super dark, super dark here at Time to Read.
So I thought it was interesting that just a little nerdy kind of librarian thing, and maybe it's just because I don't really know cataloging very well. But Holmes's name was Mudgett. That was his last name, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So here, it like on the call number on the book spine, it actually says Mudgett.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, why is that?
I'm not sure. My guess was that because sometimes the call number reflects the subject of the book, and if one of the listed subjects is Mudgett, comma, whatever his first name was.
That's just
But
interesting.
we should ask.
Yeah, because I mean, they only talk about Mudgett right at the very beginning, and then he's Holmes after that.
Yeah.
And he's only one portion of this book of multiple.
It really probably should be Larson.
It's just, and then I thought it was going to be Larson. Anyway,
that's
just
really
a little
interesting.
sort of tangent that I was just interested
Libraries
in.
aren't perfect.
Well, and the other thing that kind of made my librarian brain hurt was that I've heard this book described as a nonfiction novel. And I was just like, there's no such thing where our whole life is based on fiction, nonfiction. So to call something a nonfiction novel, I was like, what? But it's been described that by many people.
Or a
The
narrative
proper I was just going to say the proper
nonfiction.
term is narrative nonfiction. For all you listeners out there.
So here's, just to kind of address Kirsten's thing, on the TP Verso, which is the reverse of the title page.
What a nerd.
This is for a little library insight. It does
I did
have
really badly in cataloging.
the Library of Congress cataloging and publication data. And so it has the subjects listed as 1 Mudgett, Herman W., 1861 to 1896. So it was either cataloged by subject for some reason, or somebody mistook that for the author's name.
Hadn't read
in the
book.
cataloging.
Right.
So
interesting.
And so for those two people that are still listening to the
Yeah, sorry.
podcast,
No, sorry.
We can cut that out.
Now we'll
It's a
figure
mystery.
out if we actually have any cataloger listeners out there.
Yeah.
They'll write
Yes.
in to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca and tell us how
Boring that was.
how we should turn in our degrees.
Yeah.
That's really
Me
funny.
especially.
That's weird.
But speaking of Mudgett or Holmes, they are introduced very early in the book, and we know that they're the serial killer. And we asked on social media, do you prefer to know who the bad guy is early on or later in the book? And I think, unsurprisingly, 88% of you said later. The more suspense, the better.
Yeah. And normally I would agree.
Yeah.
But in this book, I thought it was amazing to know right away, because if you don't know who it is, then you can't go into his building of the hotel and the suspense of what is he making and what is he going to do with this stuff. And that was the reveal, instead of, because otherwise it would be like some people disappeared and then it turned out this guy was responsible, and then you'd have to learn about everything. So because it was about the building of the fair and the building of the hotel at the same time, you kind of had to know.
And in a way, it was almost like it was two storylines,
Yeah.
Alternating in the chapters. So it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. Because actually, when they were talking about the World's Fair, they didn't talk about the murders.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, it was just
It was
sort of
like
happening at the
after-
same
Right,
time, and probably for similar reasons of like sort of these grandiose kind of illusions that these men had about like he wanted to be better than Jack the Ripper, and Burnham wanted to, be better than the Paris.
Eiffel,
Be better than the
Better than
Paris
New York.
exhibition.
And-
And we knew Daniel Burnham was an architect from the beginning. It wasn't like, big reveal, why is he doing all this stuff with the buildings? It doesn't make any sense. What is this guy?
He was an architect the whole time. Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah. And the thing too is like when a book is based on true events, then I mean, any one of us could just go and, look up the Wikipedia article and read it in 10 minutes and get the facts, which I didn't do for this book. Like I was just happy to let Erik Larson kind of reveal things at his pace. And you certainly, like you said, you knew who the killer was, but you didn't know exactly what he did. And he kind of makes all these little allusions like only Edgar Allan Poe could write such a tale. And
Right.
all these little moments where you're like, oh, what did he do? It must have been awful. And it was awful.
Oh, it was just unbelievable.
And, like the part where he's describing like you building in like trap doors and then like the slides that go in the basement.
The greased slides.
It totally reminded me of, do you guys remember that Monty Python sketch? It's called the Architect sketch, where they're supposed to design like, I can't remember what it is, like an apartment building, but what the architects are describing is clearly like a slaughterhouse. And they just can never get on the same page of what it's a really funny sketch, but it kind of reminded me of that, where he's building a hotel, but he's really building like a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, with the rotating knives.
Yeah, rotating knives, exactly. Yeah,
down the conveyor belt to the rotating knives. That is exactly what this was.
That was exactly.
It's like, this is a furnace. This is a kiln.
Yeah.
Like, but it shaped like a person.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I totally. That's what I was thinking of.
Speaking of rotating, I'm just going to segue here. I thought one of the interesting things about Holmes was the way that he rotated the construction crews to build the hotel. Like just this diabolical plan of, I'm going to save money because I'm not going to pay anyone to build this hotel. And then everyone's knowledge is compartmentalized, so no one really has a grand view of what this hotel of murder is for.
Yeah, there's like no plausible deniability there. Like this was premeditated for
Absolutely.
years and on a massive scale. Like
It totally made me think of like those paranoid directors that will sometimes only send out script bits to different actors. Like you only get your lines, you don't get the whole picture, so you can't leak the storyline, and then they
it's
film
just
different
like
things.
that.
Or they like film like 8 different endings for Game of Thrones season finales. So
but worse.
More blood. Although in Game of Thrones there could be blood.
that is true.
I've heard that things happen.
Very bloody show. But it's interesting that like we're here and laughing and joking about how compelling this story of this like essentially terrible person is, who was by all senses just completely charming in real life as well.
Well, that's how he got away with it in a way, right? Because he just talked himself out of his debts.
Yeah, like even when he faces creditors head on, often they would be like, he'd hear them out, or they'd hear him out, and then they'd be sympathetic towards him, and they'd go away or whatever. Like just incredible persuasion and
some people have that sort of con man skill, right? Could just convince you of anything.
There were a lot of men in this book.
Oh,
it was so male heavy.
Which was
you know what,
choice.
after the book that we had read last month, which was so female dominated. I mean, I did really notice that there's just because history, right?
Yeah, because history, but also like a different author, perhaps with different interests or different background, could have focused more on the fact that there was the first woman architect designed a building there, and there was a whole building about, we don't know anything about what went on with the women, but so very specific story.
Yeah.
And very specific slant to the story.
Absolutely.
So
I was going to say too, and the story was sort of male heavy, but then also because of all of those menus that were in the book, it was also full of heavy males.
Oh
my goodness.
They would be heavy as some of that stuff they ate.
I didn't know what half that stuff was on those menus.
I don't know French words for butter.
You needed that cookbook that came out that told you how to fry and fricassee a squirrel. I did enjoy all the sort of additions in the book that were obviously taken from real historic notes and from his research. So like some of I think he was looking at some of the medical records, or the medical tent at the exhibition, and when people would come through, and he could see what people would come through for. One was a very bad case of flatulence, and then they had 169 cases of something about really bad teeth pain. Like there's a lot of teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you have to wonder, like,
toothache.
how bad would your flatulence have to be that you'd go seek medical attention?
I know.
You know what I mean? Like
Really
like, I'm
bad.
like,
An extreme
oh,
case.
Lord,
That's
I
a
need-
lot of squirrel
had-
fricassee.
I need a nurse for
They
this.
had lots of crazy food there, so I bet you indigestion type stuff was very, very common. I loved stuff like that, and I think that really set the sense of the place for me. And also, you can see that as being one of the reasons why he says, I believe in the back, that he does his own primary research in person and on paper, not through Google. And so he's, you can see things like, he says, like how hard somebody was pressing with the pen and stuff like that.
Prendergast, I guess he saw one of the postcards that he had sent to
one of the
one of his future coworkers.
Yes. His boss.
Yeah.
And he could see just how hard he pressed with the pencil. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Also, a librarian deep dive in that archivists really they recognize that information like that is important or could possibly be important. So they really try and preserve every aspect of an item in an archive just because you can't tell what's going to be relevant and what's not going to be relevant. Yeah. So even if archives are digitizing a lot of their collections, many of them still want to ensure that the physical is still there to refer back to if someone wants to look at it.
Yeah, because there's some things that are just not the same as seeing something in person.
Some things don't translate into ones and zeros.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of that, some of the book, just by virtue of how he wrote it, had to have been imagined, right? Like he gives very detailed descriptions of a couple of the murders, and he kind of reconstructed it. Did that bother people that where you're reading this, you have a feeling that he's really kind of just embellishing it for the sake of the story, or you're okay with that?
It bothered me a little bit because he was so reference heavy. Like he relies on actual references, and he does have a very comprehensive list of references at the back. And I think I was okay with some of it because it's also what journalists can do, right? Where they'll put themselves in the position of the victim. But there was the one where the lady is locked in the vault and she ends up leaving the footprint on the inside of the door. And I think maybe a little bit too much guessing what she would have felt or thought in that situation. I don't know. It struck me as a little bit odd because of the tone of the rest of the book, which was very fact-based.
And whether Larson thought that, okay, I'm writing about a serial killer, I got to give some real,
Got to deliver the goods.
Yeah.
And so I'm just gonna make it up, But I have this really extensive notes and sources behind, at the back of the book. So
it wasn't just out of nowhere.
No.
But we really don't know.
No,
we
exactly.
Really don't know, so,
yeah. And I mean, there's lots of discussion about, this was a time when lots of women were coming to Chicago to work, to be independent. And I wanted to know more about that. Like, so why Chicago was also described as being like this terrible, filthy, smelly place.
It was called like the Black City in contrast to the White City of the Exposition.
Yeah. And so why were so many women drawn there, and what was happening at the time? I mean, okay, so obviously I have some different interests that I wanted to be explored.
They came for the squirrel.
They came for the squirrel. What struck me about that is that a lot of the women were doing things that to me seemed very progressive. Mm-hmm. Like they were owning businesses, they were becoming pharmacists and doctors and architects. And we sort of at least I sort of had this impression that the 1800s was a lot more buttoned down than that. And but I feel like there was something was buttoned. But I feel like maybe the first half of the 20th century backslid, right? And like the 50s and stuff was actually a backslide in terms of women's ability to participate in public life, because I was surprised that these 17-year-old girls were just went off on their own to the city to become receptionists or whatever. And I just,
or even that there was a
21-year-old
architect, a female architect, that I also didn't think
in
that in 1880s or whatever
it's
it was.
Usually something you hear of in the 70s, you know, but 1893.
So when we did ask a question about there were lots of characters in this book, and there was Burnham and Holmes, they were the major characters, but there were lots of minor characters too. And we asked the question about what were your favorite minor characters. And I mean, a minor character that I liked and I wanted to know more about was Sophia Hayden, who was the female architect, who was hired to design and build the women's pavilion. Was that what it was called?
Where they stuck all the women's stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like let's just put that all in one
Not the
place.
science.
And we'll pay her $1,000. We'll pay the male architects $10,000. And then she didn't end up, actually that was like the last thing that she ended up building. She didn't end up building anything after that. Like the experience wasn't the greatest for her. So anyway, that was one minor character that then I did actually go and look up again, and because I wanted to find out more about her. Yeah. And the poet Harriet Monroe too.
That was mine, Harriet Monroe, because I feel like the subplot is Harriet Monroe watching all this happen, right? As the sister-in-law of the guy that she was in love with who dies, John Root. But she's still like, she's involved with everything, and she's writing to everybody about everything, and she's writing poems about it, and she's having this, her own kind of fantastic life where she's founding, or she's helping be involved in this burgeoning American early poetry movement.
About halfway through the book, I had to go back to the index to see where she was mentioned first, because like, who's she again? Like, because like,
there
she's
are
always
so many.
She's always just kind of showing up and like has really interesting things to say. I'm like, how is she connected? And then I remembered, because it was on page 40, and here I was halfway through the book. But
she's the one who wrote the poem at the launch of the fair. Yes. That only some people could hear because they didn't have microphones.
She thought was fabulous.
That was. I actually went and looked up that poem.
Oh, really?
I didn't think it was terribly good. But she did found. What did she found? Poetry magazine, which is impressive. So if you can't write a poem, found a poetry magazine.
You can still be a champion for poetry.
You may have already heard about the Idea Mill Makerspace at Millennium Library, offering community access to technologies like sound booths, 3D printers, and photography. It's really, really cool. But did you also know that we have roving maker labs that visit the branches around the city, offering access to building materials and crafting supplies? During the month of November, visit Pembina Trail Library on Tuesday evenings, St. Boniface on Thursday evenings, and Sir William Stevenson Library on Friday afternoons, and get busy with our Crafting Maker Lab. Try your hand with a spirograph, with some sewing, a button maker, or a typewriter. Or if engineering is more your gig, during the month of December, visit Louis Riel on Thursday evenings, Harvey Smith on Tuesday afternoons, Westwood on Thursday evenings, and Monroe Library on Tuesday afternoons to build with our Engineering Maker Lab. Create with Lego, Duplo, Kiva planks, K'NEX, Engino, and more. Check out our latest newsletter for times and locations. You can pick up a print copy at your local branch or visit us online at winnipeg.ca/library. The Maker Labs are designed for all ages, are drop-in, and are free. What will you make today?
So microphones obviously weren't invented, but there were a lot of things that were invented during the World's Fair, some of which we're still using today, like shredded wheat, which they said wasn't going to last.
Yeah.
Is it in your house?
Yeah, I don't eat it, but somebody in my house eats it. So.
It looks like hay.
It does.
And Aunt Jemima came from the World's Fair.
Which I eat.
Pabst Blue Ribbon, which was apparently an award-winning beer at some point in its career.
Before the hipsters took it over.
I like the little bit of shade that it gets in the book, though, where it's like not super fancy or something.
Yeah.
And that the company really played up the fact that it won an award. But then if you read a little deeper, like the exhibition didn't really give out those kinds of awards. So it's kind of like the mythology of
made up award.
Award winning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I liked, my favorite invention was the vertical file by Melville Dewey.
Yes.
I'm just keeping with my nerdy librarian vibe here at this podcast.
I always like the library references in these books too. Yeah. That was great. I think my favorite was cream of wheat because I'm telling you, on a winter's day, there's nothing more fine than, and I'll tell you this might be a controversial opinion. I prefer the instant cream of wheat, the one where you just add hot boiling water to, than that stuff that you
sacrilege.
That stuff that you cook on the stove. That stuff I don't know, it tastes funny, but a nice little hot water.
I love the stove cooking. You put it on there and then you can boil it down to the consistency that you like it.
We have fights in our household over this, I have to say. Cream of wheat, everybody.
I used to get upset as a child if my mom put milk on the cream of wheat.
Oh.
There's no milk on my hot cereal.
Everybody has a process.
Yes.
I had a couple shout outs that I wanted to do before I named my invention. One is for the electric railway. Yay, electric railway. One is for Tesla and his AC alternating current power systems. Yay for electric light.
Tesla.
Yay, Tesla.
I love Tesla. The teleautograph, which was sort of a kind of fax machine where if you wrote something on one side, the corresponding machine would write it out. So you could use...
Margaret Atwood claim to invent that?
Margaret Atwood is a immortal being. She was actually at the 1893 World's Fair.
Shout out to the device that made plates for printing books in Braille, which was unveiled there, and Helen Keller and her amazing teacher Annie Sullivan and their reaction to seeing that invention, giving big hugs and stuff like that. But my favorite invention is that most useful of inventions, the squashed penny.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Useful indeed.
Yes, this is sarcasm, but I love a good squash penny.
And the worst thing is when you go up to it, the machine and it's broke. Have you ever seen that? Where it's like, oh man, I want to get that squash penny. And it's like, no, out of service.
Do you have a big collection of squash pennies, Trevor?
What I do is I squish them and then I lose them. So I wish I did have a big collection.
So they just
They're
scattered
all
around.
squished and they're easy to get, caught.
Yeah. No.
So
I have a half dozen or so.
My favorite, I was thinking about what my favorite one was, and it didn't come to me until 6 o'clock this morning when I was listening to Nate Dogg at home.
That's too early.
Yeah. But that little ditty that the guy wrote, the do 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 do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was sampled in the beginning of a Nate Dogg song written in the 2000s. The I Got Love remix samples that little melody. So
I sang that song a lot as a kid for some reason. Like it's just one of those things that stuck in my head. And
like
then anytime there was like a snake, I was
catchy earworm.
Yeah.
So since reading this book, like I've just been noticing all these things that have been around since the World's Fair that got introduced to the World's Fair. It's kind of been bizarre in that sense. I can't look at my pantry the same way.
And you were mentioning a little bit before about minor characters and how they left an impression. It kind of reminded me a little bit. There's this British comedian, James Acaster, and he has this bit where, when people tell a story and they start off by saying, this Chinese person or whatever, and then he says, well, I hope that's relevant. So he says, what you should do is you should tell a story, and at the end, as a surprise, say, and that person was Chinese. And I feel like Erik Larson does this a bit in the book, especially towards the end, where he'll tell a story and he's like, and that person was Walt Disney's father, or and that woman was Helen Keller, and it was like it was kind of like a little like a bit much at the end where he starts telling a story about an anonymous person, like, oh, which famous person is this going to be? And then it's cool, like the connections were cool, but eventually it kind of seems a little overused towards
like
the end.
Ferris, right?
The whole build up of Ferris. I was just going to say
and that
too.
man's name?
The architect from Pennsylvania or whatever it was. And then,
but he had a good name. What was his full name? It was amazing. It was like George Washington Ferris or something.
I was thinking about Ferris, and I was like, oh, we should have asked this question on social media, wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. We should have asked what people prefer, the Ferris wheel or the Eiffel Tower.
We can still do that.
I felt like anxiety when I was reading about the Ferris wheel and when they were first like testing it and the first people going on it and doing the first rotation, and I felt
when
anxiety.
They were like people just ran up and climbed on the scaffolding of the Ferris wheel.
I know. I just felt like, even though I knew everything was going to be okay, although really so many things went wrong too, not just with the Ferris wheel, but with so many things at the exhibition.
Well, and they clearly felt that too. They were like, this does not look strong enough. Don't let anybody on it. So yes, his name was George Washington Gale Ferris Jr., which is an awesome name. Good job.
I like too how his wife was a real advocate. Like she was on site.
And she was on the first
wheel.
rotation too. I'm like,
and he wasn't there for a lot of it because I guess he was back in Pennsylvania or whatever. But she was like right there. It seemed like they were a team.
Yeah. I mean, aside from Burnham, who was there like all the time, there lots of the architects and designers were sort of off doing other things, or off convalescing, or off being sick, or off.
That one guy died, Root, whatever.
Yeah. But to answer your question about whether I would like the Ferris wheel or Eiffel Tower, I actually don't have an answer for it. I wanted us to come back to that. I think maybe the Ferris wheel. think I like that. Yeah, better.
Well, I've been on a Ferris wheel. I've never been on the Eiffel Tower.
Well, maybe that's it too, because I was just in Paris and I went to the Eiffel Tower, but I didn't want to line up and I didn't want to pay to go up the Eiffel Tower. So I've never been up the Eiffel Tower either, not to the top anyway.
It's kind of interesting. I think the Ferris wheel for me, just because it proliferated the world more than the Eiffel Tower. There's just one Eiffel Tower, but there's Ferris wheels everywhere. It became something that everyone could experience, unlike the Eiffel Tower, which only if you go to France can you experience.
There's one in Vegas, isn't there?
Yes.
An Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
Right. And probably a Ferris wheel or two.
Yes.
Probably.
Right.
I don't like heights, so I don't want either of them. Thank you.
The thing that I found crazy was like, how crazy is it that the Eiffel Tower was only meant to last like a few months for the exposition, right?
Yeah.
And the things have been around for 130 years. Like, did they rebuild it like stronger? Like that's a long time for a temporary thing to last.
Well, and there are lots of other buildings in Paris that had been built for their exposition, and they still remain. So they didn't with the Chicago one, they destroyed everything.
Well, there's one
afterwards.
The Museum of Science and Industry is the only building that still
remains.
That's on that campus. It's right near the
you know
University
what?
of Chicago.
That's what really cheesed me about this book was that, okay, sure, you want to make this really fantastic thing. Okay, sure, you want to spend all this money and try to insist that you're better than New York because that's really important to you at the time. But why not make it a thing that lasts? Like, I get that the ephemeral part of it is part of it and it's very poetic and stuff like that, but you've got people starving and you've got people out of jobs, and you're just going to put so much effort and money and work into something that you can brag about. It just was such a waste.
And such pompous, audacity and entitlement.
This is the big project that we all have to strive for, and it's a vision, and it's like, and then it's over, and we can say that we did it. It was just so... I don't know.
Yeah, because I didn't realize that they destroyed and they
also
set it on fire.
Yeah, and there was like a time and money factor too, right? They were running out of time, so they built them. Like, didn't they just put like plaster on the outside because they knew that that was quicker than brick? If they built it in brick, it would have cost way too much.
Like, they could have made an actual center of industry and intellect and design instead of this.
Yeah, I guess so, but I guess it's a bit of a sliding scale in terms of, like, you could say that about a lot of things, like why waste your time painting a picture instead of,
except that
painting a house.
I'm talking about the scale and size and waste, and that's a whole other thing.
But we just gave a whole list of things that came out of the fair that
and
still
what
exist.
else could have come out if it lasted longer?
Well, and this was
stuck around.
And this was the first World Fair in the States, right? Like the first big one was in London, and then there was Paris. And so I think in subsequent World Fairs, they got better at that. Like, the only World Fair I've ever attended was Expo 86 in Vancouver.
Me too.
And they designed it so that when it was over, like False Creek and that geodesic dome thing would become a science center. So they had sort of more forethought into what the land was going to be used. Whereas before, like now, all that's left is this one museum. But the cool thing is how Frederick Law Olmstead kept pushing for that wooded island, and they kept, trying to encroach on it. But the wooded island is still there. It's still there to this day. So it's almost like, Olmstead played the long game.
The long game.
And it's like maybe he had to fight for it at the time, but, 130 years later, it's the thing that's still around.
Yeah.
So.
And it's this, it's the same as, like, we're still doing stuff like that. Olympics roll into towns and things get built, and then they roll out, and there's these huge, massive structures going to waste and rotting and stuff like that. So,
well, and Expo 86, they made sure that all the homeless people that were downtown Vancouver, they were shipped off somewhere else to make room for this beautiful new False Creek, and
right, because before
all
that
these buildings.
It wasn't very desirable land or whatever,
so
right? Warehouses and things.
Yeah, I guess a good thing that came out of the Chicago Fair, and that I didn't realize was the 8-hour work week and minimum wage for workers, which I thought was
there's
interesting.
a lot of labor politics.
Yeah.
And I would have been interested to read more about that in the
Same
book,
here.
because there was lots of talk about the workers going on strike and the workers having grievances, and it's presented in the book as like one of the hurdles that our hero has to get over. But I don't know what they were, because he does seem to have in a lot of ways treated workers really well and in a very enlightened way in some ways for the time. So I wanted to know, why were they so unhappy? What were they striking for? And that's not in there, but I guess that's a whole other book.
Yeah.
You're right. It's funny the perspective that it's written, because you're kind of on Daniel Burnham's side. You're like, these workers, they're just, why aren't they cooperating? And I was like, I had to take a step back. I'm like, no, wait, they have rights. Like, these are people.
These are people. They need some time off.
Maybe Daniel Burnham's the bad guy. And Holmes.
And Holmes is just the worst guy.
He's just misunderstood.
And Burnham's just trying to figure out what to do with all the manure from the 10,000 horses,
Yeah.
that are.
But that was a really neat thing, like the fact that they were paralleled.
Olmstead,
And it's like, what was he saying about Burnham and this stuff in paralleling him with Holmes? Was he contrasting them as one is dark and one is white? Or is he saying that there are maybe certain similarities when you're so determined with your own vision?
And that was one of the questions.
That's the similarity.
That's another question we asked, was how do we feel about having both those stories told in the same book, Burnham's and Holmes, and whether it would have been better just to see Burnham's story separate or Holmes's. And there actually was a book written just about Holmes. I looked up. It's by Adam Seltzer. It came out a couple of years ago, and it just follows Holmes, and really it kind of covers the same ground that Erik Larson does, but he kind of goes through and kind of corrects a few things and shows where there might be some inconsistencies, but it's not nearly as interesting as Devil in the White City, because it's just much more linear, like a police procedural kind of thing.
Right.
And it tells more about Holmes before and after the fair and that kind of stuff, which is, if that's your thing, it's interesting. But comparing these two stories together, I think worked really well.
Well, and it's like when you're, looking at a piece of art, and it's great to know what was happening at the time that piece of art was painted, or this Holmes, how he, came to be, what was happening at that time. I think it all does give some good,
really
interesting context.
Yeah, sorry, just to jump on. But with the context, it really does give you an idea of why he was able to get away with any of this stuff. If you know about the whole mania over the fair and why people were just coming, like people were coming unaccompanied and on their own, and what Chicago was going through at the time, and the crazy amount of building and hotels and stuff, why it was easy for him to do what he did.
And they knew that people were vanishing and disappearing. They just couldn't keep
resources
up
to do it. The police force was overrun.
Well, who could even conceive of it being like one person responsible for a bunch of it instead of people just going off to another city?
Yeah.
And I think they talk about too how sometimes when we read a book in the past, we latently transpose current day police into that time when they didn't have the training or the resources or the skills or the science to be doing these investigations. It was more reactionary police force as opposed to like a proactive detective kind of.
Although that detective was really cool.
I was impressed, at the very end there, sort of how he pursued Holmes and went from city to city and went to every single hotel.
And
that
even
is
came to
detective
Canada.
work.
I know,
an international thing.
Well, that helped him solve no credit card, no cell phone.
No
towers to help.
I never really got what was going on there. Why was he moving those kids around? And it just,
because he could.
He was just
control.
And how he had the mother in one hotel a few blocks away from the kids, just because he was a monster, I guess. We're not really supposed to understand it.
He was the devil, and he saw himself that way. He even thought he started to look like the devil, right?
That's right.
Whatever the devil looks like.
Yeah.
Winnipeg Public Library offers free 24/7 access to Lynda Library, a version of lynda.com for libraries. Lynda Library is a leading online learning resource that provides thousands of instructional videos and online courses. There is something for everyone, from the very beginner to the professional. Each video course is presented by a subject matter expert in a clear, easy-to-follow way. Many of the courses include downloadable material you can use to follow along with the instructor. Learn about photography, web design, Photoshop, music production, 3D graphics, software development, and more. New courses are added regularly, and older courses are updated as needed. To access Lynda Library, go to winnipeg.ca/library and click on the Databases button. Scroll down to Lynda Library and click to enter. After you've entered your library card information, you'll be at Lynda's website. If this is your first time, click on the Create a Profile link, which lets you keep track of which courses you've taken and how far along you are in each one. Once you're logged in, you can explore the vast array of courses now available to you. Enjoy!
At this point, we need to move on to our most awkwardly worded segment. Can you tell me a book you would also like?
I can.
I sure can.
Do it.
Me too.
Okay. I wonder if we will all pick the same book. Mine is a recent book about a serial killer. It's called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. It's super recent because they caught the serial killer last spring, finally. And unfortunately, Michelle McNamara passed away last winter, I believe, or she passed away before the book was finished. So she didn't get to see that a lot of her work led to this guy's capture. And so this book, as well as Devil in the White City, they both feature super brazen, very premeditated serial killers. But I'll Be Gone in the Dark is totally contrasted in that it's more recent in terms of detectives having psychological profiles and stuff like that, and then how they caught him using DNA results. And I think it was 23andMe or something similar, where they tracked down relatives of his and then made family trees to narrow down who he could be. So that was really amazing, easy to read, gripping book. And it's called I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer.
Creepy.
It's so good.
My book, another book you might want to read after this one, also is set in Chicago, features a character who is referenced in The Devil in the White City. The book is called Loving Frank by Nancy Horan. It was Horan's first novel, published in 2007, and it is a novel, but it is blending of the fact and the fiction, and it envisions and describes the love affair between the architect Frank Lloyd Wright and Mamie Borthwick Cheney, who was an advocate for women's rights. So it definitely draws on a lot of extensive research about Mamie Cheney, and it's very much from her point of view and her torment about being an intellectual during that time period in her own right, and the challenges that brings in society at that time, sort of in the early 1900s. And then other themes explored are the role of artists in society and the development of feminism in Europe and North America. And I think there's so much history, of course, written from a male perspective, because that's where a lot of we have the papers of the men, and the influential women are often just a footnote of those. So I really loved this book, even though it is fiction, but there's so much fact in there. And she was a real person, and she sounded like a fascinating person. And there are lots of other really interesting women characters as well that were strong in the feminism of the early 1900s. So Loving Frank by Nancy Horan.
Okay.
Nice.
The book that I chose also takes place in Chicago, and what got to me about this book was the idea of blending narrative and fictionalized narrative with the nonfiction aspect, or the truth, and which reminded me of James Frey, who was there was a big controversy when he wrote A Million Little Pieces as to whether or not it was true, and if so, how true it was. But I'm going to recommend the sequel to that book, My Friend Leonard, which talks about James Frey's post-rehab experience in Chicago. He meets up with kind of a gangster type character who kind of takes him under his wing and shows him how to live a positive and happy life without substance abuse. So it's a very good story. If you liked A Million Little Pieces, this one is also very good.
Yeah, with Devil in the White City, you could go so many different ways with with branching off from it. You could go the serial killer route. You could go like another book about Chicago. You could do, one of the other minor characters. And so I kind of followed Kirsten's lead, and I've already talked about this character a little bit, but Frederick Law Olmstead, who was the landscape architect who was hired to design the grounds. And I just found his storyline really compelling in the novel. Or not, see, I'm doing it now. It's not a novel. And how, he would have these grand plans for things that, wouldn't look necessarily good at the moment, but he had a vision of seeing things decades down the road or building things for posterity, not just in Chicago, but he designs, Central Park in New York, Mount Royal in Montreal, all these things. So anyway, the book that I'm saying that is another book that you might like is called A Clearing in the Distance, Frederick Law Olmstead and America in the 19th Century, which was written by a Canadian, Witold Rybinski. It came out about 20 years ago, and I have to be fully honest that I haven't read the whole thing yet. I'm partway through it, but I'm enjoying it. And so if you want to know more about Frederick Law Olmstead, I found that part where he ended up in an asylum, but it was an asylum of the grounds that he designed, and his sort of last sort of like thought was, they didn't follow his directions. It's just like I found that really, really heart-wrenching. So.
I'm going to pick that up because I really love that guy too. I love that he appreciated the wildness and like telling a story with a space rather than just having a bunch of pretty flowers and stuff.
And when they were rushing to get the fair open, he had to stick the pretty flowers in, remember, just to make it look nice. And it was like, I hate this, but I'm going to have to do this. And, I'm going to redo this all. Like, he had so many challenges.
He was a real artist, though. You got the sense, he's like, don't mess with my vision. And no, you can't do that. This was designed for this way for a reason. It was, he was very cool.
Very cool.
Very cool.
So before we leave this book, I just was reminded of something that I saw in the news the other day. And one of the other aspects of this book was they, of all things, tied the Titanic into, which you sort of forget about, but it kind of bookends the book.
Which was amazing as well.
But did you hear that by 2020, they're going to launch the Titanic 2?
I don't think that's a good idea. I think they should probably just leave it alone.
Article.
It did sound really far-fetched, but I think,
Or this is that.
Oh boy, I'm going to be embarrassed if it is a beaver. I don't think
it
it
sounds legit.
Yeah. But
hubris, people. Stop it.
I wonder if Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet will be on the first voyage.
Well, speaking of, didn't Leonardo DiCaprio option the movie for this
but
book?
he wanted to play Holmes.
I
thought. That's what I read.
I'm not surprised. It kind of seems like something that would like appeal to.
And of course, Martin Scorsese is supposed to be involved as well.
Yes.
So.
Right. So does that mean he'll get Daniel Day-Lewis to come out of retirement to play Burnham?
That would be pretty epic.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
And in the meantime, it's time for everyone's favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, the part of each show where our hosts boil down their most prevalent thoughts of the past month into one word. Who's got a word or words? Or nerd words. I mean,
I could go first if you like. I have a tiny bit of a story that goes along with my word. So last month...
Tell us a story.
Last month on October 16th, it happened to be Noah Webster's birthday, the one of the creators of the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So I don't know if you've ever looked at the Merriam-Webster Twitter account, but they will often tweet little things that are relevant to what's going on in the news. So
they're great.
So they really like to throw shade at certain things, and they're really quite clever. So whoever's managing the social media of Merriam-Webster, kudos to you. And so they said, because it was Noah Webster's birthday, that for every like of that post, they would provide one obscure, unusual, or just fairly interesting word. And so the last time I checked that tweet, it had over 38,000 likes. And so I don't know how far they actually went. They actually really started to try to issue these words. So, and like I say, they kind of like to throw shade at things. So word number 45, and if you think about it, the president number 45. So word number 45 is cockalorum, which is a boastful and self-important person. So I thought, good for you, Merriam-Webster, making it political, and good luck on those other 38,000 words you're going to have to come up with.
I'm gonna slide in right there because I have a connected word, and it's from the book, actually. It was grandiloquent. Grandiloquent? I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's grandiloquent. And Collins Dictionary had the best definition. Sorry, Merriam-Webster, but Collins Dictionary had the best definition. And it's grandiloquent language or behavior is very formal, literary, or exaggerated, and is used by people when they want to seem important. So it's connected to bombastic and grandiose. So just to slide that in, maybe about number 45. I don't know. Just, yeah.
So since we're talking about dictionaries, I just want to throw a fun fact. So it's Merriam-Webster's dictionary because you can copyright that. The term Webster is public domain. So if anyone wants to start a Webster's dictionary, they can start their own Webster's dictionary. Just a fun fact on that.
Interesting.
But my word is not grand or eloquent. My word is posy. Posy being a poem or a body of poems or poetry. It's just kind of a less fancy term for poetry. And the reason poetry's been on my mind is I read an Instagram. I read a story online from The Atlantic called How Instagram Saved Poetry. And it's talking about how Instagram is a big scene for poets these days. They talk about how Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur has outsold Homer as the best-selling book of poetry of all time, which is crazy to think about. And why I chose Posey is because they talk about Bukowski. In the article, they talk about how poets generally don't make money and how Instagram is allowing them to make money. And they use Charles Bukowski as an example of a person who didn't make money as a poet, which I don't think is quite right. By the end of his career, he was quite well off in terms of poets and was able to make quite a bit of money off of his work. So
Posy. Pocket full of posy. I don't know. I think that's supposed to be a flower, but anyway.
I thought you were going to say Parker Posey.
Parker Posey. My nerd word also comes from the book, and it's clack. And those are the professional applauders that are hired to provide enthusiastic ovations and demand encores and cry brava to or for anyone willing to pay for that. And the word does sound like a clap. And it's a French word, obviously, meaning to clap, claquer. And the English-speaking speakers borrowed the word in the 19th century. So you have the claqueurs, but you can also be the chef of the claque. You can also be the rieurs, which is the laughers. You can be the pleureurs, the criers, the chatouillers, the ticklers, who kept the audience in good humor, and the bisseurs, the encorers, the ones who kept shouting, bis, bis, encore, encore. According to Wikipedia, while the practice of hiring a claque died out in the mid-20th century, you can still find instances of professional applauders or claques, most famously with the Bolshoi Ballet and U.S. presidential speaking engagements. Clack.
With all those job descriptions, it's a wonder they had room for the audience.
It's a big group of people moving in.
Ticklers in the first two rows.
And then the chef du claque to just, coordinate everybody.
Wow.
So unfortunately, we have to sign off for this month. Thank you so much, dear readers, for tuning in to the decenary episode of the Time to Read podcast. Next month, we will be reading I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. Find it at your local Winnipeg Public Library branch, and be sure to join us in our discussions on our website, wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca, or by emailing us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca. If you find us on iTunes, we'd love it if you were to give us a coveted 5-star rating. And until next time, make sure you find
Time to Read.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Time to Read. We were discussing The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Erik Larson. Time to Read is a production of the Winnipeg Public Library. Your hosts today were Alan Chorney, Kirsten Werman, Erica Ball, and Trevor Lockhart. Our webmaster is Aaron Seaburn. Our social media guru is Regan Brew. Audio production and music by Dennis Penner. We want you to be part of the show too. Email us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca with suggestions for books that you'd like us to read and discuss, and comments and questions about the books we're reading for our next show. Visit us on the web at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. Check out our show notes with links to some of the things we talked about today, and take part in a discussion about the books we're reading. Next month, we're reading I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. We're looking forward to hearing what you think.
All I need
restrain myself from making a French tickler joke when you were talking about these words, too.